Snow fell in slow, heavy flakes along the frozen bend of the river near Angel's Crossing, each crystal settling with a whisper that seemed to muffle the world into eerie silence. The kind of silence that made a man aware of his own heartbeat, his own breath, the fragility of warmth in a landscape determined to steal it away. Nayati rode alone through the white curtain, his horse's breath streaming in thick plumes. The animal moved with careful deliberation, testing each step before committing its weight. Beneath Nayati's buffalo robe and buckskin leggings, his right thigh throbbed with a deep, relentless ache. The old bullet lodged near the bone was a constant companion, a souvenir from 3 winters past, when soldiers had opened fire on his hunting party for crossing an invisible boundary. He was 32 years old, though the lines around his eyes suggested older. His face was lean and weathered, his jaw strong, his nose slightly crooked. His black hair hung in 2 thick braids past his shoulders. Around his neck, he wore a simple necklace of bone and turquoise, a gift from his wife. Long gone, now buried in the hills with their infant son. The memory of them was never far from his thoughts, especially in winter. Winter was when they had died coughing blood while he was away, earning coin to buy medicine that arrived too late. The hunt today had been fruitless. His saddlebags hung light. Game was scarce this winter, driven away by railroad crews and settlers. He had been considering turning back when he heard it, a sound so faint he thought he had imagined it. A thin, raw cry, barely more than the whisper of wind, yet unmistakably human. Unmistakably young. Every instinct screamed warning. A crying child in the wilderness meant trouble. But his hands were already turning his horse toward the sound. Near the water's edge, where the solid ground gave way to treacherous ice, he spotted it. A wicker basket sat half buried in snow, right where the frozen river groaned and shifted. A corner of patterned fabric protruded from the top. And from within came that thin, desperate crying. Nayati's heart kicked hard. He dismounted, ignoring the pain in his leg, and pushed forward through deep snow. Inside the basket, wrapped in a blue and white blanket, was an infant. A white baby girl, her face mottled red from cold, her lips tinged faint blue. Her tiny fists waved weakly. She was perhaps 3 months old, dying from exposure. Someone had left her here deliberately. A sharp crack split the air. The ice beneath the basket was breaking a jagged line, racing across the surface. The basket tilted, sliding toward open water. Nayati lunged. His boots plunged into snow, his wounded legs screaming, but he grabbed the basket just as the ice gave way. A slab dropped into the current and was swept away instantly. His horse, holding the reins looped around his wrist, reared back, yanking him to safety. He pressed the baby against his chest, inside his robe, sharing his warmth. Her skin was far too cold, but she was breathing. She was alive. He looked at the empty riverbank, at the wagon ruts already filling with snow, the gray sky heavy with more weather. He thought of his son's grave and his wife's beside it, and 3 years of walking through a hollow world. Looking down at this tiny, helpless creature, he felt something shift in his chest. Not healing, but perhaps the first crack in the wall around his heart. A small, crooked smile touched his lips. "Guess you're my family now." He said quietly, the words half promise, half defiance. He swung into the saddle and rode hard for the Lakota winter camp, hidden among the cottonwoods, knowing he was choosing a path that would change everything. The Lakota winter camp lay in a sheltered hollow, where cottonwood trees broke the worst of the wind. 8 teepees stood in a loose circle, their buffalo hide covers darkened by smoke. Perhaps 35 souls in total, winnowed down from what had once been 100. They had already lost 3 elders this season. When Nayati rode in with the bundle pressed against his chest, people gathered. A young boy ran ahead shouting. By the time Nayati reached the camp circle, perhaps 20 people had assembled. Wei knew an elder woman whose eyes missed nothing, stepped forward and peered at the bundle. "A baby," she said neutrally. Then she pulled back the blanket. "A white baby." The murmur grew louder, taking on an edge. White children meant trouble. Manawa emerged from his lodge with deliberate dignity. He was perhaps 55 winters, his jaw scarred from a cavalry saber, his walk marked by a limp. But his back was straight, his shoulders broad, and when he spoke, people listened. He approached and looked up at his nephew. For a long moment, he simply studied Nayati and the bundle. Then he spoke, his voice carrying. "You have been hunting. I see no meat. Only another mouth to feed." Nayati dismounted stiffly. "I found her by the river, on the ice, in a basket. Whoever left her meant for her to die. She would have been gone in another hour." "So you brought her here," Wenu said, accusation in her tone. "You brought white trouble to our lodge poles. She is an infant grandmother. She cannot speak. The trouble is not hers, it belongs to whoever abandoned her." "That will not matter to the soldiers," Wenu replied sharply. "They will say we stole her. You know this is true." Before Nayati could respond, another figure pushed through the crowd. Luyu was perhaps 30 winters small and slender with large dark eyes. 3 years ago, her husband had been killed. 2 years ago, her only child had died of fever. Since then, she had lived quietly at the edge of camp, respected for her healing skills, but kept separate by the invisible wall that surrounded those touched by too much loss. She stepped forward. "Let me see," she said simply. Nayati transferred the bundle to her arms. Luyu examined the baby with practiced efficiency. "She has been in the cold for several hours. Her temperature is too low, but she is strong. She will live if kept warm and fed." She paused. "That is not a small if." "We have the goat," someone said. "It gives milk still." "Goat's milk will work," Luyu confirmed. "But she will need constant care." "I will do it," Luyu said quietly. "I have the knowledge and the time, and I have arms that ache to hold a child again." Menawa studied her, then nodded. "It is decided. Luyu will care for the baby while she is here." He emphasized the last 2 words and turned to Nayati. "But she cannot stay long. A day, perhaps 2. But then she must go to her own people." "The nearest town is Angel's Crossing," Nayati said. "A day's ride downstream. There is a doctor who will treat Indians and whites alike. I can take her there." Menawa placed a hand on Nayati's shoulder. "Come, we will talk." Inside Menawa's lodge, a fire burned. Menawa filled a pipe, lit it, and passed it to Nayati. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, Menawa said quietly, "You carry grief. Since you lost Nahimana and your son, you blame yourself for not being here." Nayati stiffened but did not look away. "You were working to buy medicine." Menawa continued gently. "When the sickness came, it took them quickly. Even if you had been here, you could not have stopped it. That grief is real. But that white baby is not your wife. She is not your son. Saving her will not bring them back. You understand this?" "I understand," Nayati said quietly. "But she was there dying, and I could save her. That has to mean something." "It does matter," Menawa said, "but it also brings danger. You walk a ridge between 2 worlds, nephew. Be careful you do not fall." They finished the pipe in silence. That night, Nayati prepared for the journey, dried meat-water rope rifle ammunition. A storm arrived near midnight, with howling wind and fresh snow. Morning came eventually, and Nayati wrapped the baby in layers, saddled his horse, and prepared to leave. Luyu handed over the baby with clear reluctance. "Bring her back safe." "I will try," he said. As he rode out, Menawa stood watching. The baby made soft sounds against his chest, and Nayati adjusted his hold. The sun climbed higher, painting the snow gold and pink. "Still my family," Nayati said quietly. "For better or worse." They rode toward Angel's Crossing. Angel's Crossing appeared through blowing snow, a cluster of rough buildings clinging to the railroad tracks. One muddy main street, a depot with water tower, a saloon called Lucky 7, a general store, blacksmith, boarding house. Near noon, Nayati rode to Dr. Theodore Marsh's office, a small frame building with a hand-painted shingle. He dismounted carefully, his bad leg so stiff he nearly fell, then pushed inside without knocking. Warmth hit him. The office was small but organized: desk chairs, shelves of bottles, examination table. Dr. Marsh looked up from his desk. He was thin, perhaps 45, with graying hair and crooked spectacles. His expression slipped briefly into surprise. Theodore Marsh had come west 5 years ago after his wife died in Philadelphia. He stood immediately. "On the table," he said curtly. "Quickly." Nayati laid the bundle down and unwrapped layers. The baby let out a thin wail, and relief flooded through him. Dr. Marsh's hands moved efficiently, checking pulse, breathing temperature. "Where did you find her?" "By the river, in a basket on the ice." The doctor's hands stilled briefly. "Someone left her deliberately." "Yes." Marsh finished and wrapped the baby in a clean blanket. "She has been exposed to severe cold. Her temperature is too low, breathing slightly labored. But you got her here in time. She should survive." Footsteps sounded. "Theodore, I heard you had a patient." Caroline Hale appeared and stopped, eyes going wide. Caroline was perhaps 25, with dark brown hair and a practical bun, gray-green eyes, intelligent and direct. She wore a simple blue wool dress. Her hands were chapped and ink-stained, the schoolteacher. Caroline had come to Angel's Crossing 2 years ago after her younger sister Clara married, moved west, and vanished. Letters stopped, inquiries went unanswered. She had taken the teaching position and spent 2 years following cold trails. She stepped fully inside. "Where did this child come from?" "He found her by the river," Dr. Marsh said. "Abandoned, nearly frozen." Caroline's face flushed with anger, not at Nayati, but at whoever had done this. She moved to look closer. Her hand brushed the patterned blanket. She paused, fingers tracing the blue and white geometric design. "I have seen this before. Blankets exactly like this were on the orphan train that came through last autumn." "The orphan train?" Nayati asked. Caroline picked up the blanket. "The Children's Aid Society sends trains from eastern cities carrying orphan children to be placed with families in the West. The society provides each child with a blanket in this pattern. One of those trains came through in September. It was supposed to continue to Silver Springs, but one of the cars was reported lost. The railroad said there had been a bridge collapse during a storm. A terrible tragedy. But they moved on very quickly." "You did not believe them," Dr. Marsh said. "No, because in the weeks after I saw 3 children in Angel's Crossing that I recognized from the train. They were with families that had not gone through any official adoption process. When I asked the station master, he told me it was none of my business." She ran her hands along the blanket's edges. "There is something sewn into the lining." She reached for scissors and carefully picked at rough stitches, working free a scrap of paper. They read in silence. It was a torn ledger page, Sept 12. Hayes City, 6 delivered, $450, Sept 18. Angel's Crossing, special order, Salvatore, $800, $800. "Salvatore," Caroline said quietly, pale. "Salvatore Bellini. He runs freight contracts for the railroad. They were selling children." Before anyone could respond, the door banged open. 2 men strode in. The first was Sheriff Elias Crow, tall with a hard face, cold slate-gray eyes, and compact physicality that suggested violence. He wore a badge, 2 revolvers with worn handles. People called him Stoneheart. The second was slick, well-dressed. Salvatore Rough Rick Bellini wore an expensive suit, fur-collared coat, polished boots. His hands were soft, his eyes calculating. He looked at the baby with an expression that made Nayati's skin crawl. Not seeing a child, seeing property. "Heard you got a baby here, Doc," Crow said flatly. His eyes landed on Nayati. "The Indian tracker, Nayati. Found this child, did you?" Crow's tone was elaborately casual. Funny how Indians keep finding things that don't belong to them. Salvatore stepped forward with a practiced smile. "This infant is property of the railroad. From the orphan train car that was lost. She needs to be turned over to proper authorities." "The doctor says the child is still weak," Caroline said sharply. "She cannot be moved. The law decides that," Crow said, hand moving to his revolver. "And the law says property of the railroad gets returned. Now." Dr. Marsh stepped forward. "Sheriff, this child needs medical supervision." "I am not asking Doc," Crow said dangerously. "Hand over the child, now." Nayati looked at the baby. He thought about the ledger scrap, the $800 special order, the cold calculation in their eyes. If he handed her over, she would vanish into whatever trafficking system they had built. He made his choice. "She comes with me," Nayati said quietly. Crow's head snapped toward him. "What did you say, Indian?" "She comes with me. She does not go with men who look at children like cattle." Crow's revolver cleared its holster. "Put the baby down, or I will shoot you where you stand." Dr. Marsh moved between them. "Sheriff, this is my office." Crow shoved the doctor aside hard. The revolver's hammer clicked back. Nayati saw Caroline's hand moving toward the lantern, saw understanding pass between them. Caroline grabbed the lantern and blew out the flame, plunging the room into gray twilight. Crow swung his revolver. Dr. Marsh threw himself at Crow's legs. Both men went down. "Go!" Caroline shouted, grabbing her coat. Nayati burst out the back door into the alley, the baby pressed tight against his chest. Gunfire cracked. Wood exploded near him. He ran for the livery stable. A young man emerged, Oliver Kowalski, Polish immigrant, who worked as stable hand. 2 years ago, Nayati had saved his life during a cattle stampede. Oliver saw the badge glinting as Crow and deputies spilled into view, saw the guns, and reacted instantly. He slammed the stable doors shut and dropped the bar across them. "Back way," he said quietly. "You were never here." Gunfire erupted. Horses screamed. Nayati grabbed his horse. Caroline followed. They burst out the back door at a gallop. They raced down narrow lanes between buildings. But it led to the river 60 yards wide, its surface treacherous ice and dark water. Caroline looked at the ice. "That will not hold." "We ride light and straight," Nayati said. "Trust the horse." He urged the horse forward. The animal stepped onto ice with a sharp crack. Every step was a gamble. The ice groaned, snapping and popping. A sheet shifted dangerously. The horse scrambled, then caught solid ground and lunged forward. Behind them, Crow fired, but the distance was too great. 2/3 across the horse's hindquarters broke through with a crack like breaking bones. The animal thrashed in waist-deep water. Caroline cried out. Nayati kicked free and slid into the water. The cold was shocking, stealing his breath. He grabbed the saddle horn and pulled with everything he had. "Come on!" The horse found footing and heaved forward. Its front legs caught ice edge, and it lunged, scrabbling. Nayati pushed from below. Together, they got the animal out. They stood dripping on the far bank, shaking. The baby was wailing alive and fighting. Across the river, Crow stood watching, unwilling to risk the crossing. "You are dead, Indian. I will hunt you down and hang you." Nayati did not answer. He climbed into the saddle, helped Caroline up, and turned away. His clothes were already freezing. They needed shelter fast, or the cold would claim them all. Behind them, Angel's Crossing disappeared, and the hunt began. They rode hard until exhaustion forced them to stop. Nayati's soaked clothes were freezing ice forming on his coat. Caroline shook violently. The baby had stopped crying, too quiet now. He guided the horse to a shallow ravine with an overhang. They needed fire, but fire could be seen for miles. In the end, survival won. Nayati built a small fire deep in the ravine, shielding the flames. Caroline warmed water and dripped it into the baby's mouth using a cloth strip. The infant drank weakly, but steadily. They sat close, sharing warmth, pressing against each other without self-consciousness, because survival trumped propriety. "Why did you help me?" Caroline asked. "You could have walked away." "Why did you blow out the lantern?" Nayati countered. Caroline was quiet, then said, "Because I saw the way Salvatore looked at her. There is something wrong here. I could not let it happen." She paused. "And because my sister vanished, I came here to find Clara, and in 2 years I have found nothing. But I know whatever took her is connected to this." "Then you have your answer," Nayati said quietly. "We both did what we had to do." Caroline looked at the baby. "How can men look at something like this and see only money?" "Because they have trained themselves to see nothing else," Nayati replied bitterly. "When you see people as property, it becomes easy to do terrible things." Caroline began explaining. The orphan train started 20 years ago. Cities like New York had thousands of orphans. The Children's Aid Society sends them west to be placed with families. In theory, it is not bad. Some children find good homes, but there are no real safeguards. Some people take children not to love them, but to use them. And some have realized they can buy and sell these children outside the official system entirely. The train that came through in September had 50 children. Caroline continued. 20 went through formal placement. The rest stayed on the train, supposedly headed to Silver Springs. Then came the report of the wrecked car, and everyone moved on. Except I saw 3 children from that train show up in Angel's Crossing anyway, working at ranches, looking thin and frightened. "And no one questions this," Nayati said. "Who would the families claim they went through proper channels? The sheriff is part of it. The railroad claims ignorance." They fell silent, contemplating the ugly machinery they had stumbled into. "We need proof," Nayati said finally. "That ledger scrap is not enough. We need something undeniable." "Like what?" "The children. If we can find where they are keeping the others and get them to safety, that would be proof no one could dismiss." Caroline looked hopeful and fearful. "Do you think there are others?" The ledger mentioned delivery pending. That baby was supposed to go somewhere. Someone paid $800 for her. That means whoever paid is still waiting. There is money to be made in continuing the operation. So, where would they keep children? Nayati thought about geography. There is an old silver mine near Bronze Canyon, about 2 days' ride northeast. It was abandoned 5 years ago after a cave-in. But last summer, some of my uncle's people saw wagons going there. Lantern light in the shafts at night. A perfect place to hide children until buyers could be found, Caroline said. Exactly. Caroline looked at the baby, her jaw setting. Then we go there. We find proof, and we take it to the territorial marshal in Sapphire Springs. Sapphire Springs is 3 days' hard ride, Nayati pointed out, and we would have to cross open country with Crow hunting us. Nothing about this has been easy, Caroline replied. But we cannot stop now. Nayati studied her face in the firelight. You are braver than you know. Caroline laughed shortly. I am terrified, but being brave means doing what needs to be done, despite the fear. Nayati was silent for a long time, feeding the fire. Finally, he spoke, voice low and rough. 3 years ago, my wife and son died while I was away working. I was earning money to buy medicine, but it came too late, and I was not there to hold them. I have carried that absence like a wound. I cannot bring them back. But when I saw that baby dying, I could do something. I could choose to be there to act to save one life, even if I could not save the ones that mattered most. He looked at Caroline, eyes bright. So I am not being brave either. I am just trying to carry less grief. If that means risking a noose, so be it. Caroline took his hand. Then we fight together. And maybe we both carry less grief when this is done. They took turns sleeping and keeping watch. Eventually, dawn broke gray over the eastern hills. They rose stiff and sore, fed the baby what little they had, and prepared to ride again. Still my family, Nayati said softly to the baby. Then to Caroline, and now we are 3. For better or worse, Caroline echoed. They rode north toward Bronze Canyon and whatever waited there. The landscape changed as they rode flat prairie, giving way to broken country rolling hills cut by dry washes. They kept to low ground, using natural folds to stay hidden. By midday, exhaustion weighed on them both. Neither had slept properly in days. The baby had been fussy all morning. Nayati knew of Oliver's homestead perhaps 3 hours away. Oliver Kowalski, Polish immigrant. I saved his life once. He might help us. They reached the homestead as sun declined. Oliver's cabin was small and listing built from rough lumber and sod. A leaning barn, small corral, scraggly chickens. Oliver stepped out with a rifle wary. Then recognition flared. Nayati. He looked at Caroline, the baby. You are the one they are looking for. I did not take her, Nayati said wearily. I saved her. Oliver looked past them, checking for pursuit. Crow came through yesterday, with 6 men. They searched my cabin, took food, roughed me up. They said you kidnapped a white baby. Said anyone who helps you is guilty. Said there is a reward, $50. That is a lot of money, Oliver. Oliver spat into the snow. Not enough. Not enough to buy what you gave me. You rode into Stampede for me. Could have died. He stepped aside. Come. Inside is warm. You tell me real story. Inside warmth enveloped them. Oliver poured coffee, brought hardtack, and preserves disappeared briefly to return with goat's milk. Caroline fed the baby, who drank desperately. Color returned to the infant's cheeks. While Caroline tended the baby, Nayati told Oliver everything, finding the child. The ledger scrapped Salvatore and Crow's attempt to take her, the escape, their plan to investigate the old mine. Oliver's face grew darker with each revelation. My wife died on ship coming to America, Oliver said quietly. Cholera. We were going to build life together. All gone before we even saw new country. I understand what is to lose family. These children, they have no choice. No. Someone steals their future for money. This is wrong. This is evil. He stood abruptly, rummaged in a trunk, pulled out a revolver and ammunition. You take. And this, a thick wool blanket clearly treasured, for baby. Oliver, we cannot. You take, Oliver interrupted firmly. Is payment of debt. Maybe this makes us even, yes. They stayed 2 days, giving Caroline and the baby time to recover. The weather closed in steady snow that slowed pursuit, but also slowed their own progress. Oliver proved valuable. The old mine at Bronze Canyon is maybe 3 hours northeast. There is road, but road is watched. Better is canyon approach from west through the breaks. You come at mine from behind. Have you been there recently? Oliver shook his head. Not since summer. But I saw wagons lamplight at night. Before dawn on the 3rd day, they prepared to leave. Oliver gave them additional supplies, dried meat, hardtack, water, extra ammunition. You should know, Oliver said quietly. Riders came yesterday. Saw them from distance. 3 men, maybe 4. Could be Crow's men. They know general area where you are. Time is running out. Then we go now, Nayati said. They said goodbye to Oliver and rode into broken country. The ride took most of the day, following Oliver's route through the maze of canyons and washes. They reached a vantage point overlooking the mine at sunset. Below, perhaps a quarter-mile distant, the mine entrance was visible, a dark wound in the hillside with ramshackle structures clustered around it. Smoke rose from chimneys. Men with rifles patrolled. And there, unmistakable, was a crude corral. Inside, small figures huddled together. Children. Caroline's breath caught. Nayati felt anger and grief tighten his chest. They had been right. As they watched, a covered wagon rolled up. Men emerged to meet it. In the glow of lanterns, Nayati saw Salvatore Bellini. And beside him, Sheriff Crow himself. This was organized, protected operating with explicit support of local law enforcement. We need to get closer, Caroline whispered. See how many children. Find records we can steal. Nayati knew she was right, but every instinct screamed caution. He counted at least 4 guards visible, plus Salvatore, plus Crow. Probably more inside. We wait until full dark, Nayati said. Then we go on foot. Quiet reconnaissance. We find out what we are dealing with. No heroics. Agreed. Caroline nodded reluctantly. Agreed. But if we get a chance to free those children tonight, we take it. If we get a chance. But survival first. They waited as darkness fell, watching the mine, counting guards, noting patrol patterns. It was cold work, but necessary. Near midnight, the guards began drifting inside, called by Crow for some kind of meeting. For perhaps 15 minutes, the perimeter was thinner. Now, Nayati whispered. Stay low, stay quiet. They left the baby wrapped warm, hidden in a depression at the ridge top. They moved down the slope like ghosts, using every bit of cover. They reached the corral and crouched beside it. Up close, the children were worse than they had appeared, thin, filthy, dressed in rags, faces gaunt. One older boy noticed them and started to cry out, but Nayati pressed a finger to his lips. We are here to help, but you must be quiet. The boy's eyes were wide, but he nodded. Other children began to notice. Caroline leaned close. We are going to get you out, but we need to know how many men guard you. Where are they keeping records? An older girl, perhaps 12, spoke quietly. There are usually 6 guards. Mr. Bellini keeps papers in the office inside the mine. Sheriff Crow comes 3 or 4 times a week. How long have you been here? Some of us since September, when the train wrecked, except it did not really wreck. They took us off at night, brought us here. They said we would be placed with families. But then people started coming, looking at us like horses. Some children got taken away. Nayati felt sick. 6 months. These children had been held for 6 months. Before he could ask more, a shout shattered the night. Hey, someone's at the corral. A guard had spotted them, a rifle-cracked bullet whining past. Run, Nayati shouted. They sprinted for the slope, bullets tracking them. Another shot closer, and Nayati felt something tug his coat, a near miss. They scrambled up on hands and knees, expecting bullets in their backs. But the guards were shooting in poor light at moving targets. They reached the top, grabbed the crying baby, and ran for their horse. Behind them, men were organizing, spreading out. They had minutes at most. Nayati swung into the saddle, pulled Caroline up, and kicked the horse into motion. They rode hard into darkness with no plan except to put distance between themselves and guns. They had learned what they needed, but they had also revealed themselves. Crow knew they were close. The hunt would intensify. They rode through the night, pushing the exhausted horse beyond wisdom. By gray dawn, they found shelter in a shallow depression ringed by junipers. Caroline was checking the baby when she suddenly drew a sharp breath. "The blanket. Give me the blanket the baby was wrapped in." Nayati retrieved it. Caroline examined it systematically, fingers working along seams. "There was one piece of paper," she muttered. "But if someone had time to hide one document, they might have hidden more." She found it near the bottom, a hardened rectangle sewn into a double-thick fold. Using her knife, she carefully opened the stitching and extracted an oilskin packet. Inside was a folded paper, not torn this time, but complete, and a small brass locket on a delicate chain. Caroline unfolded the paper first. It was a detailed ledger page, special contracts. Confidential, Mary Sullivan, age 6 MAUS. Grayson Ranch, $800. Deposit received Sept 10. Thomas and William Kemp, ages 8 and 10. Morrison Mine, $200 A. Delivered Sept 15. Sarah Chen, age 14. House of Pleasant Hours, $600. Delivered Sept 20, perhaps 15 entries total. But it was the first that made Caroline's face go white, her hands shaking. "Mary Sullivan," she whispered. 6 months old. Grayson Ranch, $800. Caroline picked up the brass locket with trembling hands. She opened it, revealing a miniature portrait of a young woman who looked remarkably like Caroline herself. Behind the portrait was a tiny folded note. She read aloud, voice breaking. "If anything happens to me, find my sister Caroline in Angel's Crossing. Do not trust the men who run the cars. C.H." "C.H.," Nayati said slowly. "Clara Hale, your sister?" Caroline nodded, tears streaming. "Clara married Martin Grayson 2 years ago. I got one letter saying she had moved to his ranch, that she was happy. Then nothing." She looked at the baby. "This baby. Mary Sullivan. Clara paid for her. Clara is the buyer." The truth crashed over Nayati with sickening weight. The baby he had saved her intended destination was Caroline's own sister. "I do not understand," Caroline said, voice small and lost. "Clara would never. How could she buy one like this?" Nayati could imagine. Desperation could twist good people until right and wrong became negotiable. Perhaps Clara had convinced herself it was rescue, giving a child a home. Perhaps she had wanted something so badly she chose not to see the darkness. Caroline clutched the baby tighter. "What do we do now?" "My sister. My own sister, she is part of this. If we expose the whole operation, Clara will be arrested. She will go to prison. But if we do not, more children will be bought and sold." "I know," Nayati said gently. "But you know what the right answer is." Caroline looked at the baby, then at the girl in the corral, asking when someone would come to help. Her eyes were streaming tears, but her jaw was set. "We finish this," she said steadily. "We get the evidence. We free the children. We take it to the marshal. Even if it means Clara goes to prison. Even if I lose my sister forever. Because those children deserve justice more than Clara deserves protection." Nayati felt pride and respect expand in his chest for this woman who could make such a choice. "Then we need a plan," he said. They were discussing possibilities when hoofbeats approached. But the rider who appeared was not one of Crow's men. Ricardo Vega reined up, breathing hard, his scarred face determined. The bounty hunter looked at the baby. "You are hard to track," Ricardo said. "Crow is paying me to bring you in $50 for information, another $100 if I deliver you alive." He paused, face twisting. "He never mentioned you had a baby. Never said anything about children being sold. Just said you were a kidnapper. And now you know different," Nayati said, hand on his rifle. "So, what are you going to do?" Ricardo was silent, jaw working. "My sister was taken when I was 14. Men grabbed her near the border, took her into Mexico. We never saw her again. I know what happened, sold, used, broken. My mama died of grief. My papa drank himself to death." He looked at Nayati, pain, bone deep in his eyes. "I became a bounty hunter because I hunt men who chose to break the law. I do not hunt people trying to save children, and I do not help men who sell them." "Crow lied to you?" Caroline said quietly. "Crow lied to me," Ricardo confirmed with cold fury. "Made me complicit without my knowing. That is a debt that needs settling." "So you will help us?" "I will help you. Not because I am a good man, I ain't. But there are lines even I do not cross. Besides, a bitter smile. Crow still owes me money, and I always collect." And they were 3 instead of 2. 3 against Crow was still terrible odds, but better than 2. They spent the next hour planning using Ricardo's knowledge and Nayati's experience. It was dangerous, half desperate, unlikely to work. But it was all they had. As they waited for darkness, Caroline sat holding the baby and staring at the locket. "I loved my sister. Part of me still does. But if we survive, I will have to testify against her. How do I live with that?" "One day at a time," Nayati replied. "You do what is right, and you carry the cost because the alternative is worse." Caroline leaned her head against his shoulder, seeking comfort. Nayati wrapped his arm around her, and the baby giving what support he could. Ricardo watched them. "You two got something worth fighting for. That is rare. If we live through tonight," Nayati said, "maybe we figure it out." "No rarer. If we do not," Ricardo said, "at least you spent your last day fighting for something that matters." As they waited for darkness, preparing for the assault that would decide everything, Nayati found himself hoping they would survive, if only to discover what might be possible between a scarred warrior and a determined schoolteacher. 2 people trying to build something new from ashes. The sun continued its arc, and shadows lengthened toward evening. They moved toward the mine under cover of darkness. Ricardo knew the patrol patterns from his earlier scouting. The plan was simple. Ricardo would create a distraction at the main entrance, while Nayati and Caroline slipped in through an old ventilation shaft on the hillside behind the mine. Oliver had told them about the shaft, a narrow opening hidden behind scrub brush, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, but offering access to the mine's secondary tunnels. If they could reach the office where Salvatore kept the ledgers, grab the evidence, and get out before the alarm was raised, they might actually survive this. It was a plan built on hope and desperation, but it was all they had. They left the baby with Ricardo wrapped warm and hidden in a rocky depression well away from the mine. It tore at both Nayati and Caroline to leave her, but taking an infant into an armed assault was impossible. "If we do not come back," Caroline told Ricardo, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Take her to Sapphire Springs, to the territorial marshal. Tell him everything." Ricardo nodded grimly. "You will come back. You got too much to live for to die now." Nayati and Caroline worked their way around the perimeter, staying low, moving when guards were looking the other direction. The ventilation shaft was where Oliver had described a dark opening barely visible in the scrub. They squeezed through one at a time, the rough rock scraping their clothes and skin. Inside, the air was dank and cold-smelling of minerals and decay. They had one small lantern kept shuttered to the barest sliver of light. The tunnel was narrow, requiring them to move in single file, sometimes crouching, sometimes crawling. Water dripped from unseen crevices, and the sound echoed strangely in the confined space. They could hear voices ahead, men talking, laughing, the sound carrying through stone in unpredictable ways. Nayati moved with painful slowness, testing each step, each handhold, knowing that one dislodged rock, one careless sound, would bring armed men running. They reached a junction where the secondary tunnel opened onto a main passage. Lamplight flickered on rough-hewn walls. Nayati peered around the corner carefully. 2 guards stood perhaps 20 feet away, rifles slung over shoulders, talking in low voices. Beyond them, a wooden door with a padlock, probably the office where records were kept. Getting past the guards without being seen was impossible. They would have to wait for Ricardo's distraction. Right on schedule, a gunshot cracked from somewhere outside, followed by shouting. The guards looked at each other, grabbed their rifles, and ran toward the mine entrance. Nayati and Caroline moved fast. Caroline produced a set of lockpicks tools she had acquired during her 2 years of investigating her sister's disappearance. Learning skills a schoolteacher should never need. Her hands shook slightly as she worked the lock, but within 30 seconds, it clicked open. Inside the office, a desk held stacks of papers, ledgers, correspondence. Caroline began grabbing everything that looked relevant, stuffing papers into the bag she had brought. Nayati kept watch at the door, rifle ready. "Got it," Caroline whispered, holding up a thick ledger. "This has everything. Names, dates, amounts, destinations. It is all here." More gunfire erupted outside, louder this time. Ricardo was earning his payment in blood and sweat, keeping the guards occupied. But the distraction would not last forever. They were halfway back to the secondary tunnel when a voice behind them shouted, "Hey, stop right there." A guard had appeared from a side passage. His rifle was already coming up. Nayati spun and fired first. The confined space magnified the gunshot into something that felt like the end of the world. The guard went down, and immediately the mine erupted with shouts and running footsteps. "Run!" Nayati shouted unnecessarily. Caroline was already sprinting for the ventilation shaft. They scrambled through the narrow opening, Caroline first, then Nayati. Behind them, bullets ricocheted off rock, whining and sparking in the darkness. Nayati felt a searing line of pain across his ribs as a bullet grazed him. But he kept moving. They emerged into open air and ran sliding down the hillside in a controlled fall. Ricardo was there with their horse, and the baby already mounted on his own horse. "Time to go!" he shouted, firing his rifle back at pursuers emerging from the mine entrance. They rode hard, 3 horses running flat out across broken ground in near darkness, the kind of riding that could kill a horse or a rider or both if luck ran out. But luck held, and gradually the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. They did not stop until dawn, when the horses could literally run no farther. They found shelter in a box canyon, set a watch, and collapsed into exhausted sleep that was more like unconsciousness. When Nayati woke, Caroline was sitting beside him, checking the wound on his ribs. "It is not deep," she said quietly, "but it needs cleaning." She tore strips from her already tattered petticoat and cleaned the wound with water from their canteen. Her hands were gentle but efficient. When she finished, she looked at him, really looked at him, and something passed between them that went beyond words. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For this, for everything, for caring when you had every reason not to. Thank you for the same." Nayati replied. He reached up and touched her face just once, a brief contact that acknowledged everything unspoken between them. Ricardo cleared his throat from across the small camp. Hate to interrupt, but we still got a problem. We got the evidence, but Crow is not going to stop hunting us. And we still got those children at the mine. He was right. Getting the ledgers was only part of the solution. The children were still imprisoned, still in danger. We ride for Sapphire Springs, Caroline said. We give this evidence to the marshal. He can organize a proper rescue with deputies and legal authority. That is the only way to do this right. It was the sensible plan. But Nayati thought about those children in the corral, thin and frightened, and about the fact that Crow would almost certainly move or scatter them as soon as he realized the ledgers were gone. We ride for Sapphire Springs, he agreed. But we ride fast. Every hour those children wait is another hour they might be moved, or worse. They mounted up and rode, pushing the horses as hard as they dared, stopping only briefly to rest and water the animals. The baby was holding up remarkably well, sleeping most of the time, waking to feed and then settling again. She seemed to understand in whatever way infants understand things that noise and fuss would endanger them all. They reached Sapphire Springs on the evening of the second day. A real town bigger than Angel's Crossing, with actual streets and legitimate businesses, and a federal marshal's office with a painted sign. Marshal James Corrigan was a weathered man in his 50s, with gray hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of presence that suggested he had seen everything twice and been unimpressed both times. He listened to their story without interruption, examined the ledgers Caroline had taken, and studied the faces of 3 exhausted, desperate people who had risked everything on the hope that someone in authority would actually care. This is big, he said finally. Railroad involvement, a corrupt sheriff, organized child trafficking operating for months or maybe years. If half of what you are telling me is true, this is going to shake the whole territory. It is all true, Caroline said quietly. Every word. Corrigan looked at her, then at Nayati, then at Ricardo. You 3 are the strangest collection of witnesses I have ever seen. A school teacher, a Lakota tracker, and a bounty hunter. He shook his head. But these ledgers do not lie. Names, amounts, dates, it is all here. He stood and began issuing orders to his deputies. Round up every available man. Send a telegram to Fort Kearny for military support. We are going to need at least 20 armed men to take that mine and arrest everyone involved. He turned back to them. You 3 are done. You have done more than anyone had a right to ask. Now you let the law handle it. Those children have been waiting for 6 months, Nayati said quietly. How long until you can move? 2 days, maybe 3, to organize everything properly? Too long, Caroline said. Crow will move them or scatter them. We need to go now. Corrigan looked at her, then at the determination in all 3 of their faces, and something in his expression shifted. You are not going to let this go, are you? Would you? Nayati asked. If you had seen what we have seen. The marshal was silent for a moment, then sighed. Tomorrow at dawn. I can have 10 deputies ready by then. Not ideal, but it will have to be enough. We ride at first light, hit the mine hard and fast, and pray we are not too late. That night they stayed in a boarding house in Sapphire Springs, real beds, hot food, the luxury of safety for the first time in weeks. Caroline fed the baby with milk bought from a local dairy, and the infant ate with the appetite of someone who had finally decided she was going to survive. Nayati sat by the window, watching the street below his hand, resting on the rifle across his knees. Tomorrow would decide everything. Tomorrow they would face Crow and his men one final time, and either justice would be done, or they would all die trying. Caroline came to sit beside him, the baby sleeping in her arms. Are you afraid? She asked quietly. Yes, Nayati admitted, but I have been afraid before. Fear is just proof that you are alive and that what you are doing matters. My sister will go to prison, Caroline said, voicing the thought that had been haunting her. When this is over, when the truth comes out, Clara will be arrested and tried and sent away. Part of me knows she deserves it, but part of me... Her voice broke. Nayati put his arm around her shoulders. Part of you still loves her. That is not wrong. Love does not disappear just because someone does something terrible. You can love her and still hold her accountable. Both things can be true. Caroline leaned into him, and they sat together in silence. As night deepened over Sapphire Springs, two damaged people who had found something unexpected in the midst of chaos and violence. The possibility of being understood, of not being alone, of building something new, from the wreckage of everything they had lost. Whatever happens tomorrow, Caroline said quietly, I am glad I met you. I am glad we did this together. So am I, Nayati replied, and he meant it with his whole scarred, battered, slowly healing heart. They rode out at dawn, Nayati, Caroline, Ricardo, Marshal Corrigan, and 10 deputies. The baby stayed behind in Sapphire Springs with the marshal's wife, a kind woman who had raised 5 children of her own, and who promised to guard the infant with her life. It was hard for Caroline to leave the baby behind, but taking her into what would certainly be a gunfight was impossible. We come back for her, Nayati said firmly. All of us. That is the plan. The ride to Bronze Canyon took most of the day. They approached from multiple directions surrounding the mine before anyone inside knew they were coming. Marshal Corrigan split his force. Half would assault the main entrance, while the other half secured the back exits and prevented escape. Nayati, Caroline, and Ricardo were with the main assault force. As they crept into position in the pre-dawn darkness, Nayati could see the mine exactly as he remembered the ramshackle buildings, the corral with its huddled children, the guards on patrol. But something was different. There were more men than before, at least a dozen armed guards instead of the usual 6. And wagons were being loaded, children being herded toward them with rough efficiency. They are moving them? Caroline whispered horror in her voice. They know we took the ledgers. They are scattering the evidence. Then we move now, Marshal Corrigan said grimly. Before those wagons leave, on my signal. He raised his hand, held it for one moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, then dropped it. Federal Marshal, everyone on the ground now. The mine exploded into chaos. Guards grabbed for weapons. Children screamed. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions at once. Nayati ran toward the corral, rifle in hand, focused on one goal: get those children to safety. A guard appeared in his path, raising a shotgun. Nayati fired first, the guard went down, and he kept moving. Caroline was right behind him, and together they reached the corral gate. Nayati shot off the lock and yanked the gate open. Run, he shouted at the children. Into the rocks, stay low. The older children grabbed the younger ones and ran. Several deputies moved to cover them, forming a protective barrier between the fleeing children and the gunfight raging around the mine buildings. Salvatore Bellini appeared from one of the structures, saw Nayati, and raised a revolver. But Ricardo was faster. His shot took Salvatore in the shoulder, spinning the man around and sending him to the ground, screaming and clutching the wound. That is for lying to me, Ricardo said coldly, advancing on the fallen man. And this, he kicked Salvatore's gun away, is for selling children. Sheriff Crow emerged from the mine entrance, a hostage held in front of him, one of the older boys from the corral held with a knife to his throat. Everyone back off, Crow shouted. Back off or the boy dies. Marshal Corrigan stepped into view, his own gun steady. "It is over, Crow. We have your ledgers. We have witnesses. You can surrender now and face trial, or you can die here. Your choice." "My choice." Crow laughed, a wild, unhinged sound. "You think I am going to hang for giving homes to orphans, for providing a service? These children were nothing street trash. I gave them value. I gave them purpose." "You gave them chains," Nayati said, stepping forward despite Corrigan's warning gesture. "You stole their lives and sold them like cattle. There is no excuse, no justification. You are just a man who chose cruelty for profit." Crow's eyes fixed on Nayati with pure hatred. "This is all your fault, Indian. Everything was fine until you could not mind your own business. You should have left that baby to die on the ice where she belonged." "She belonged exactly where I found her," Nayati replied. "In someone's arms, being cared for, being loved. That is where all children belong. But you will never understand that." For a moment, time seemed to hold its breath. Then several things happened at once. The boy in Crow's grasp suddenly went limp, dead weight dropping beneath the sheriff's arm. Crow startled, his grip loosening for just an instant. Caroline, who had worked her way around to the side, threw a rock that struck Crow's gun arm. And Nayati, who had been slowly closing the distance, lunged forward and tackled the sheriff, both men going down hard. The knife skittered away across frozen ground. The boy scrambled to safety, and Nayati and Crow wrestled in the dirt, both fighting for control, for survival, for everything. Crow was bigger, but Nayati was desperate. He had come too far, sacrificed too much to let this man escape justice. He landed a solid punch to Crow's jaw, then another. The sheriff's head snapped back and his struggles weakened. Marshal Corrigan and 2 deputies rushed in and hauled Crow to his feet, slapping manacles on his wrists. "Elias Crow, you are under arrest for kidnapping, trafficking, conspiracy, and about 20 other charges I will think of on the ride back." The gunfight was over. Several of Crow's men lay dead or wounded. Others had surrendered. And standing among the chaos, bruised and bleeding but alive, were Nayati, Caroline, and Ricardo. Caroline immediately went to the children, gathering them, counting them, making sure none were injured. Nayati stood catching his breath, his ribs screaming where the earlier wound had been, aggravated his bad leg, barely supporting his weight. But they were alive. The children were safe. It was over. Almost. One of the deputies called out from inside the mine. "Marshal, you need to see this." They found it in a back chamber, not just ledgers, but correspondence contracts, lists of buyers across 3 territories. The operation was even bigger than they had thought, spanning years and involving dozens of complicit parties. And there, in a locked box, they found birth certificates, adoption papers, all the documentation needed to give stolen children legal identities as the sons and daughters of people who had paid for them. One certificate bore the name Mary Sullivan, age 6 months, parents listed as Clara and Martin Grayson. Caroline held it with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. "I have to go to her," she said. "To Clara. Before the deputies arrive to arrest her. I have to see her one more time." "Then we go together," Nayati said. "You do not face this alone." The Grayson Ranch was a half-day's ride from the mine. They left the bulk of the operation to Marshal Corrigan and his deputies, but Corrigan assigned 2 men to accompany Nayati and Caroline to serve the arrest warrant. They arrived at the Grayson Ranch as the sun was setting. It was a prosperous-looking place, large house, well-maintained outbuildings, the kind of property that spoke of wealth and comfort. Clara Grayson answered the door herself. She looked so much like Caroline, same dark hair, same gray-green eyes. But where Caroline's face bore the marks of struggle and determination, Clara's showed only the soft contentment of someone who had never been truly tested. Until now. Caroline. Clara said, shock and confusion warring on her face. What are you doing here? I thought I heard you were in Angel's Crossing, but you never wrote, never came to visit. Where is the baby? Caroline asked, her voice flat and cold. Where is Mary Sullivan? Clara's face went white. I do not know what you mean. Do not lie to me, Caroline said, and her voice broke. Not now. Not after everything. Where is the baby you paid $800 for, the baby you bought from men who steal children and sell them like property? Clara stumbled back, one hand going to her mouth. How did you, Caroline? Please, you have to understand. We could not have children of our own. Martin wanted an heir, and they said she was an orphan, that no one wanted her. She has a name, Caroline interrupted. Mary Sullivan. And she had a mother who loved her enough to hide evidence that would expose the men who took her. That mother is probably dead now, Clara. Dead because she tried to protect her child from monsters. And you paid those monsters. You gave them money to keep doing what they do. I did not know, Clara sobbed. I swear I did not know it was like that. They said it was legal, that the children needed homes. You knew enough, Caroline said, and her voice was hard as stone now. You knew enough to pay in cash. You knew enough not to ask questions. You knew enough to hide the truth from me, from everyone. You chose not to see because seeing would have meant giving up what you wanted. One of the deputies stepped forward with the warrant. Clara Grayson, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit child trafficking. Clara collapsed weeping as the deputy read her rights. Her husband, Martin Grayson, appeared from inside the house, a tall man with expensive clothes and cold eyes. This is preposterous, he blustered. We have done nothing wrong. We paid for that child legally. You paid criminals, Marshal Corrigan's deputy said flatly. And now you will pay the law. Both of you. They found the baby in an upstairs nursery, sleeping peacefully in an ornate crib, dressed in expensive clothes, surrounded by toys and comfort. Caroline lifted her gently, holding her close, and the infant stirred but did not wake. I am sorry, Clara whispered from where the deputies held her. Caroline, please, I am so sorry. I never meant. I know, Caroline said, not turning around. But it does not matter what you meant. It only matters what you did, and you will have to live with that now, just as I will have to live with testifying against you. They left the Grayson ranch as night fell. Clara and Martin were taken into custody. The house was searched for additional evidence, and Caroline held the baby all the way back to Sapphire Springs. The weeks that followed were a blur of statements, depositions, and testimony. The trial was held in the territorial capital, drawing attention from newspapers across the country. The scandal of the orphan train trafficking operation became national news. Sheriff Crow was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Salvatore Bellini received 15 years and was ordered to pay restitution, though everyone knew he had already spent most of his ill-gotten gains. Clara Grayson received 5 years in a women's reformatory, while her husband Martin received 10 years for his more active role in the conspiracy. Dozens of other buyers and accomplices were arrested and tried. The Children's Aid Society underwent a complete reorganization with new oversight and requirements for verifying placements. And the children, all 15 of them who had been held at the mine, plus others identified through the seized records, were placed in legitimate orphanages or reunited with family members where possible. Through it all, Nayati and Caroline stayed in Sapphire Springs, giving testimony, answering questions, and caring for the baby who had started everything. The territorial marshal's wife, Mrs. Corrigan, helped Caroline navigate the legal process of obtaining guardianship. With Clara in prison and Martin's parental rights terminated, and with Caroline's blood relationship to Clara giving her a legitimate claim, The process moved relatively smoothly. But there was a surprise. When the judge signed the guardianship papers, he included Nayati's name alongside Caroline's. "You saved this child's life," Judge Thornton said simply. "You risked everything to protect her. In my view, that gives you more right to be called her father than any man who paid money for her." Miss Hale agrees, I assume. Caroline looked at Nayati, and something passed between them, a question, an answer, an acknowledgement of everything that had grown between them during their desperate flight. "Yes," she said quietly. "I agree." And so, by order of the territorial court, Nayati became the co-guardian of Mary Sullivan, aged 7 months alongside Caroline Hale. Ricardo, who had stayed for the trial to give his own testimony, came to say goodbye. "I am heading south," he said. "Got word of some cattle rustlers causing trouble in New Mexico. Back to hunting bad men." "Thank you," Nayati said, clasping the bounty hunter's hand. "For everything." "You taught me something," Ricardo said. "That it matters why you hunt. That some things are worth fighting for even when there is no money in it. I will not forget that." He tipped his hat to Caroline, ruffled the baby's hair gently, and rode away into the spring sunshine. Oliver came to visit, bringing news from Angel's Crossing. The town was slowly recovering from the scandal. A new sheriff had been appointed, and while some people still muttered about Indians and troublemakers, others had begun to see the truth of what had happened. "Your story is famous now," Oliver told them with a crooked smile. "The Lakota warrior who saved the white baby and brought down a corruption ring. You are a hero whether you want to be or not." "I just want to be left alone," Nayati said. "To build a life. To be at peace." "Then maybe you should not go back to Angel's Crossing," Oliver suggested. "Too many people there know you, too many opinions. Maybe you need fresh start, yes." It was good advice. After the trial concluded, Nayati and Caroline discussed their options. They could return to Angel's Crossing or to the Lakota winter camp, or they could choose a third option, building something entirely new. They chose new. They settled in a small valley halfway between Sapphire Springs and the Lakota winter camp, on land that Nayati purchased with money earned from his testimony and compensation from the territorial government for his role in breaking the trafficking ring. It was not much 100 acres of grassland with a creek running through it, some timber on the surrounding hills, and a view that stretched for miles in every direction. But it was theirs. With help from Oliver Menawa and other Lakota from the winter camp, they built a cabin small but solid, with a stone fireplace, real windows, and a loft where a child could sleep safely. They built it in a style that combined Lakota practicality with white construction techniques, a physical representation of the space between worlds where they had chosen to live. Luyu came to visit and stayed for a month, teaching Caroline the skills of frontier living, how to preserve meat, how to make soap, how to identify useful plants. The two women formed a bond, united by shared loss and the hard-won knowledge that survival required adaptability. Manawa came too and sat by the fire with Nayati, smoking and talking about the old days and the new ones being born. "You have done well, nephew," the older warrior said. "You have chosen your path and you walk it with honor. Your wife and son would be proud." "I hope so," Nayati replied. "I still carry them here." He touched his chest. "But the weight is less now. I can breathe around it." "That is all we can ask," Menawa said. "To carry our dead without being crushed by them. To honor memory without being imprisoned by it." As summer turned to autumn, Nayati and Caroline established routines. They raised horses which Nayati was skilled at training. They took in children, first 2, then 4 Lakota, and white both children who needed homes and families and a place to belong. Their house became known as a place where the lost could be found, where wounds could heal, where different worlds could meet without conflict. And through it all, they cared for Mary Sullivan, who grew from a fragile infant into a sturdy toddler with dark curls and a laugh that could light up a room. They called her Molly, a softer version of Mary, and she called Nayati Papa and Caroline Mama, without any sense that this was unusual or complicated. On a warm evening in late autumn, with the cottonwoods turning gold and the air smelling of wood smoke and coming winter, Caroline and Nayati sat on the porch of their cabin, watching Molly play with the two other children they had taken in a Lakota boy named Chaska, whose parents had died of pneumonia, and a white girl named Emma, who had been recovered from the trafficking ring and had nowhere else to go. "Do you ever regret it?" Caroline asked quietly. "Choosing this life, choosing me." Nayati looked at her. This strong, brave woman who had given up her old life to build a new one with him. "Never," he said simply. "Not for a moment. Not even when people in town stare at us, when they whisper about the Indian man and the white woman living together." "Let them whisper," Nayati said. "We know what we are. We know what we have built. That is all that matters." Caroline smiled and leaned against him, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching their children play as the sun set over the valley. The final surprise came in the spring when Marshal Corrigan rode up to their cabin with news. "Thought you would want to know," he said, accepting the coffee Caroline offered. Clara Hale was released early for good behavior. She served 3 years of her 5-year sentence. She's out now. Caroline's hand trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "Where is she?" "Working at an orphanage in Denver. Teaching the children, helping place them with families, real families this time, with proper oversight. She writes letters to the families afterward, checking on the children, making sure they are safe and loved." He paused. "She asked me to give you this." He handed Caroline an envelope. She opened it with careful fingers and read, "Dear Caroline, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, and I do not. What I did was unforgivable. But I want you to know that I understand that now. I understand what I took from that child, from her real mother, from all the children I helped traffic by choosing not to see. I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends. It will never be enough. But it is all I have. I heard that you are raising Mary Molly. I am glad. She deserves you. She deserves someone who chose to fight for children rather than someone who chose to buy them. I hope someday you can think of me without only feeling shame. I hope someday I can think of myself that way too." Your sister Clara Caroline folded the letter carefully and tucked it away. "Thank you for bringing this," she said to Corrigan. After the marshal left, Nayati asked gently, "Will you write back to her?" Caroline was quiet for a long time. "Someday," she said finally. "When I am ready. When enough time has passed that I can remember the sister I loved without only seeing what she did. But not yet. Not yet." That evening, as they prepared for bed with Molly and Chaska and Emma all asleep in the loft, Nayati pulled Caroline close and asked the question he had been building up courage to ask for months. "Marry me," he said. "Not because of the children or because people expect it, but because I love you. Because I want to build this life with you officially and permanently. Because when I imagine the future, you are in every moment of it." Caroline looked up at him, tears glistening in her eyes, but smiling. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married a month later in a ceremony that combined Lakota and Christian traditions. Manawa performed the Lakota rites, speaking of the strength found in joining two different paths. A traveling minister added Christian vows, speaking of love and commitment and the power of choosing family. Children from both Lakota and white communities ran and played together. Luyu stood as Caroline's attendant and Oliver as Nayati's witness. Even Marshal Corrigan came along with several of the deputies who had helped raid the mine. Molly scattered wildflowers from a basket, laughing as the wind caught them and sent them swirling through the air like snow. Years later, when Molly was old enough to ask about her story about where she had come from and how she had ended up with them, Nayati and Caroline told her the truth. They took her to the river bend, where Nayati had found the basket where ice had nearly claimed her life. They showed her the place where everything had started. And Nayati told her, "I saw you there so small and helpless, and I realized that family's not about blood or skin or the circumstances of birth. Family is about the choices we make. The choice to care, the choice to protect, the choice to love even when it is hard. I chose you that day," he continued. "And every day since I have chosen you again. You are my daughter. Not because of law or papers or biology, but because we have lived this life together. That is what makes us family." Molly thought about this for a long moment, then looked up at him with serious eyes. "And I choose you too," she said. "You and Mama. That makes us a family." "Yes," Nayati said, smiling. "That is exactly what it makes us." They walked back to the cabin together as the sun set three people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something that would last. Behind them, the river ran on, eternal and unchanging. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods. And in the valley where two worlds met, a family that had been forged in ice and fire settled in to build a life. On the porch, as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Nayati looked at Carolyn and Molly and the other children who had found their way to this place of healing. And he thought back to that moment on the frozen river when he had made a choice that changed everything. "Guess you're my family now," he had said then, half joking, uncertain of what the words would mean. Now surrounded by the people he loved in the home they had built together, he said the words again. But this time there was no uncertainty, no question, only the deep satisfaction of a truth fully realized. "You're my family," he said softly, pulling them all close. "My choice, my heart, my home. Forever." And Caroline, leaning into him with Molly between them and the other children, gathered close, whispered back, "Forever." The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human joys and sorrows. But in that small cabin in a valley between worlds, warmth and love and hard-won peace filled every corner, and the future, uncertain as it always was, held more promise than fear. It was enough. It was everything.